tell my kids, the skin is where most of the nutrition is. So is that true? And specifically with potatoes?
So in general, stay away from skins, period. The purpose of the toxin is there to protect it. And the barrier between the important part of the plant and the outside world is actually that skin. You're like 80% of the way towards a much safer food simply by peeling it.
What is it about raw milk that makes it so that it's illegal to sell it in most states?
Pasteurizing doesn't make bad milk good, it just makes bad milk not lethal. It's still bad milk. We started pasteurizing because that raw milk was bad for 7,000 years. Every one of us entered this world and we're a nourished baby on the back of raw milk.
This video is brought to you by Purely Tallow Skincare. And with skincare, the rule is simple. If you wouldn't eat it, you shouldn't put it on your skin. That's why we make all of our products with 100% grass-fed beef tallow. We also use emu oil and even wild camel hump fat in some of our lotions. Check out our website at purelytallow.com. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and my guest today is Bill Schindler. Bill Schindler is an author, an anthropologist, an archaeologist, and just an all-around great guy. Bill, thank you for hanging out with me today.
It is truly my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm excited about this conversation because there's so much ground to cover here with you having the background that you have. And one of the things I wanted to start with is ancestral living. I mean, that's really a big part of your background. And so for people who don't know about ancestral eating and ancestral living and why that's so important for us and for our health, I feel like it's important for our brains, all of that stuff. So can you just give us a little background on that, what ancestral living is, what it means, and what does eating ancestrally look like?
Oh, those are great topics. How
It's a big one. Speak as much time as you need. I'm kicking it off with everything.
So, like you mentioned, I'm an archaeologist, and the type of archaeology that I do is really old prehistoric archaeology. So there's a lot of different types of archaeology. My brain is rooted in the deep ancestral past. So beginning about 3.5 million years ago, when we started making our first tools, and all the way up through prehistory. And I start this conversation off with that because I want people to frame and have that image in their head of how deep our ancestral past really is. Growing up, and I think most people in this country, when we learn about the past in high school, it's like 500 years. Maybe there's a week thrown in of something before that, but it really starts with colonization in most of our classes, and that's ground into us. So anything that seems real, we say something old is really old, we start thinking in terms of thousands of years, and we can't. We have to think in terms of hundreds of thousands and millions of years. And with that said, the earliest, although they just found a new skeleton in China that may throw this off a little bit even older, but currently the most recognized, oldest modern day Homo sapiens skeleton, so same exact size, shape, biology as us today, was found in a cave in Morocco and dates to about 300,000 years ago. And we had upright walking intelligent ancestors doing all sorts of things before that, but as far as our own biology, our own species, we've been on this planet for at least 300,000 years, and not much has changed in that time. So from a dietary perspective and a lifestyle perspective, we are still living in these Stone Age bodies, these 300,000-year-old bodies. So I think there's a lot of importance that we should be placing on the foundation to nourishing ourselves in every way possible. It should be rooted in our ancestral past. When we say ancestral living and ancestral diets, we literally have to recognize that we are in Stone Age bodies still today. But there's a lot of different iterations of this, and we'll hopefully talk through a whole bunch of them. But one of the issues with, I think, when people get pigeonholed or go really, really deep into this idea of ancestral living is, number one, we have to recognize what we do know and what we don't know about the past. We have to recognize that there's a ton of diversity over 300,000 years worth of time. We're talking about a massive amount of people, societies, cultures, doing all sorts of different things in different parts of the world and different environments. So there's not one ancestral diet. We also have to recognize that no matter how much we don't want to believe this, we are filtering this information through a modern lifestyle. Like we're filtering hopefully we're going to talk about insects at some point, but we're going to filter, what these diets might really have been like and this lifestyle might really have been like through a modern lens. And we've all grown up, in this modern world. So we tend to cherry pick. Well, this sounds right. In the carnivore diet, first came out, there was a lot of resistance to that. Like, cool, what are you talking about? You're only going to eat meat. And now there was a lot of repulsion to it. And now it's a lot more, people can recognize it more as being, maybe there really is some credence to this. Maybe that really, really makes sense. And now that we've overcome that step, what is the next thing we should be looking at? Should it be organ meat? Should it be insects? Something like that. And the final piece is, and I think this is really, really important, even though we're living in these Stone Age 300,000-year-old bodies, we are living in a modern world, in a modern context. And to be fully nourished as a human, it means so much more than just the calories and the protein and the fat and the vitamins and the macro and micronutrients that we get. That's a piece of it. But for humans, food is so ingrained in every single thing that we do. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of our family traditions. It's, for some of us, it's a part of our religion. For some of us, our decisions about food have very strong political, backgrounds to it. All of the, if we're going to be fully nourished as a human, we have to recognize that we have to meet or exceed all of our requirements. And some of those are nutritional, but a lot of those are, again, cultural or emotional or whatever. And that, I think, is where we get caught up a lot, because it's very easy for somebody on a podcast or in a book or somewhere to say, hey, this is how much fat and protein. And even if they were right, and I highly doubt that there's one way to do this, but even if there was a formula for that, it is only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And to be fully nourished, we have to recognize all of these things. So Stone Age bodies, there's a foundation to our diets that is rooted in the deep ancestral past. That should be the foundation, but we also have to recognize that we are living in a more modern context, make adjustments in those places.
So what about fruits, vegetables, and grains, as far as, you knew this was coming, right? Ancestrally speaking, because in the carnivore space, we talk a lot about how our ancestral diet must have been almost exclusively meat, because we didn't have irrigation. We didn't have, big farms and agriculture and things like that. So maybe we would have come across some wild blueberries or, a wild plant here or there. We would eat a little bit of that, but that we had to have sustained ourselves on mostly the meat, the organs, the blood, the milk of animals in order to thrive and survive. So what do you think about that?
So that's again a great question, and I'm glad. Thank you so much for giving me the space to sort of flesh this out a little bit, because the clickbaits and the talking points on things like ancestral diets, they don't go deep enough to understand all the different nuances. So again, before I say anything else, please everybody remember that there's not a one size fits all thing here. Massive amount of diversity to even have a conversation about 3.5 million years worth of diets and dietary change. We're overlooking most of the diversity, but in general, this is, when I look at the archaeological record, this is how I view, very from a 40,000 foot view, very quick timeline of what our diets were like in the past. Prior to 3.5 million years ago, and that's a very important moment, because I'll say 3.5 is general, but 3.3 million years ago, to be more exact, we made our first stone tool. There's oldest tool we've ever found dates to 3.3 million years ago, and at the same time that tool was made, we start seeing butchered bones of scavenged animals. And it's not only are they making this tool, but our ancestors were using that tool to hack pieces of meat off of animals that another animal had killed, but they took the flesh off and they're eating it. So prior to that moment, so that's a very important moment, 3.5 million years ago. Prior to that, our ancestors, upright walking, they had been upright walking at this point for anywhere between 1.5 to 3.5 million years. Intelligent, at some level, culture-having beings were eating a limited amount of wild fruits and vegetables, so a limited amount of plants, and a massive amount of bugs. The mainstay of their diet were the most amount of protein and fat, which we all know are the building block of a nutritional diet, that came in the form of insects. And so a little bit of wild plants and a whole lot of insects. At 3.5 million years ago, they start scavenging. So they're using these stone tools they're making to hack pieces of meat off. So they introduce flesh, and we think there's some evidence too of busting open bones to extract the marrow. So some meat and a little bit of fat from an animal sources are coming into our diets at about 3.5 million years ago. That persists for about 1.5 million years. And then at 2 million years ago, we start hunting for the first time. We start hunting and start cooking our food at 2 million years ago. What's significant about this is the difference between hunting and scavenging is that, number one, when you're hunting, you have the opportunity, if you're good at it, to take an animal down at will. You don't have to wait for another animal to kill something else. You can take an animal down at will. But more importantly, you have first access to that entire animal. You can either eat the entire thing, choose to leave some of it, but it's your choice as the hunter. So when we're scavenging, we're only getting the leftover bits of meat. When we're hunting, we get the blood, the fat, and the organs, the part that's consumed first by predators, and we also have access to the flesh. So we're cooking our food, which again is really important, but to me not as important as accessing the entire animal and being able to take an animal down at will. And the cool thing is that 2 million years ago, when this happens, our bodies and brains, jump in size. Our brains jump to almost modern proportions at this time, and I'm convinced that's happening. What's supporting that massive body and brain growth is the introduction of incredible animal-based nutrition. But this entire time, we are eating plants and we are eating bugs. In most parts of the world, certain and actually right now at this point, 2 million years ago, we still are. After 2 million years, we just get better at the things that we're doing. We're getting better at hunting and trapping and fishing and crabbing and clamming and doing all these things, netting things and shooting things out of the sky. Whatever it is, we're doing better. We're getting more and more animals in. We're also getting better at detoxifying plants and processing plants to extract the nutrition that's in them. And this is getting better and better. All these things are getting better up until about 15,000 years ago or so, when the agricultural revolution takes place, and the massive diversity in our diets go from what we're estimating at hundreds of different plants and dozens of different animals in your diet on a yearly basis to focused solely on one or two staple grasses, like whether it's maize or rice or barley or wheat, whatever it is. When we make that transition to agriculture, several important things happen. First off, the nutrition and nutritional density and the bioavailability of our diet, the food in our diets, plummets. The other thing that happens is, because we're focused not only on plants, but especially the seeds and seeds from grasses, cereal grains, our intake of toxins skyrocket at the same time, and our fat plummets, and our protein intake plummets, and our carbohydrates skyrocket. Carbohydrate intake. But the other thing that's really important is, for the first time ever, we have members of our society that are distanced from their food. We see this and we're taught the agricultural revolution was so amazing, because with some people working harder than ever to make food, it frees up other members of society to do other things, and these very, artists and poets and all these things, but they're actually getting distanced from their food. For the first time ever, people are eating without being a part of their food chain, or a significant part of their food chain. So we're getting distanced from our food. And then during the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, we go from food producers, which is what agriculturists are, to most of us become food consumers, which is what most of us today are. And that distancing is even broader. So I say all of this, that I 100% agree that, and I truly believe, what made us human, what supported massive body and brain growth, is the incredible nutrition that came in from hunting. And I'm convinced it's because we're eating the entire animal, and we had a massive influx of not only incredible nutrient-dense food, but that the nutrients in that are very accessible to our bodies. I also believe that from before we were eating meat, during the entire time we were eating meat, and still today in different parts of the world, insects were a major part of the diet, which is, I know, a hot topic in the dietary world, but it's an important one. And plants were actually present during most of this time. However, plants were not, and I grew my entire time I was in graduate school studying to be an anthropologist and archaeologist. The way it was taught to me was the mainstay of the diets were plants. Plants were always there. Everybody ate plants every day, and when they could get meat, maybe that was a good thing, maybe it was a bad thing. It depends on who the teacher was. But the idea was that plants were always there, and that was the mainstay of the diet. And I do not believe that to be the case. Animals were the mainstay of the diet, but the idea that except in certain extreme conditions like the Arctic, the fact that there were potentially no plants in the diet, I don't believe that's necessarily the case. But what I am confident of is that when our ancestors, and still traditional groups around the world today, are consuming plants, they're incredibly careful about what plants they consume. and most importantly, how they process that plant to make it as safe and nourishing as it can possibly be. And we've lost most of that traditional knowledge today.
And do you think, like something like beans, for instance, that can kill you if you don't cook them, do you think it's worth preparing them properly and eating them, or should we just like be done with beans for a while or forever?
It's such a great question. And, I have really good friends that are full carnivores, like Anthony Chafee, for example. And we talk about such a thing. And he and I, we've had a conversation, and it would go something like, you can take this plant and you can do this to it, and you can do this to it, and you can do this to it, and you can make it, you can detoxify it, and then you can do this, and you can make the nutrients available to your body, and then you can actually eat it. And I'd be all excited. And he looked at me and says, well, why do you even do it? Why would you even take the time to do it? And I get his point. And he's right. However, one of the things that we found, and maybe you found this too, because I know before we were talking about, we have families and we have kids, and there's so many people probably listening to this that are in the same boat. You have a partner or a spouse and or kids or other people living around you that you're cooking for. And it's one thing for somebody to make, I don't mean to suggest being carnivore is extreme, but make an extreme dietary change compared to the mainstream, right? Which is so much easier in the short term to just go to the restaurant or go to the store, whatever. For one person to do it, it's a lift, but it can be done. For two people that are like-minded to do it, it's a lift, but it can be done. To do something like that as an entire family is a completely different situation. Now, we were very specific, very deliberate about how we raised our family and what we did with our food. It wasn't, our family wasn't raised full carnivore. It was more of a Weston Price sort of approach, where things like sourdough were permitted. And, if we treated grains or beans the right way, they were in our diets, that sort of thing, very high fat, animal based, that sort of, but that it was still difficult to do. We now have a restaurant, and we're in our 5th year of owning the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And when we opened this restaurant, my intent, at least in my head, or the idea that I had was, I am going to build the restaurant that I want to eat at. And if I did that, we're in a rural area in Kent County on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. There's probably 2 people in the county that would come and eat here. Like, it'd be like liver, it'd be spleen, it'd be all, all the fermented this and all. There's some people that would come. What we landed on was, we want to take and make familiar food as nourishing as it can possibly be. And I think we found the magic formula with that, because what we had, the customers that we have coming in are families where the father or the mother or both are could be carnivore, they could be keto, they could be more of a Weston Price, whatever, but everybody can come, everybody can order off the menu, and they can be guaranteed that it is the healthiest, most nourishing form of whatever that food happens to be. There's nothing on our menu you wouldn't recognize, but we are incredibly deliberate about how we prepare. We use very traditional and ancestral approaches to prepare that food. So, as a long-winded answer to your question, why do the beans? I rarely eat beans. Some people love beans. They just love them. So it isn't, I remember I did a podcast with Paul Saladino about 4 years ago. And I was talking to a few people beforehand. I'm like, oh, be careful. This is before he even started talking about sourdough bread. This was like when he was anti bread. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if he was eating fruit at that time. I mean, it was, and they're, be careful. He's going to ask you about bricks. We have a sourdough bakery. It's part of our business. He's
Right.
about bread. Be prepared. And he did. Towards the end of the podcast, he's like, all right, tell me about bread. And I knew he was ready for some sort of not an argument, but something.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, there is no nutritional requirement for bread in any form in any human. Like, it isn't a thing. Mm-hmm. But some people want to eat bread. So if you're going to have bread, true, genuine, wild, long fermented sourdough bread is the healthiest, most nourishing form of that food if you're going to eat it. I'm not telling you to eat it, but if you're going to eat it, that's the kind to have. And this is why. And it actually satisfied that part of the conversation. So should you eat beans? If you don't have any other source of protein, then that's a conversation. But if you have sources of protein, real good, incredible nutrition elsewhere, no. But if you're going to eat beans, 3 raw red kidney beans will land you in the hospital. If you simply soak them overnight and cook them the next day, Are they the safest, most nourishing form of food in the plant? No, but they're a completely different food because of that processing. And if you do that, then I would make the argument that if you're going to eat beans, then eat those kind of beans.
Yeah. Interesting. And I want to go back to the sourdough thing, but I also wanted to ask you, so when I used to eat vegetables, I don't anymore, but when I did, and when my family would eat vegetables, I would argue with them that the skin is the healthiest part. Like the outside, don't peel your tomatoes, don't peel your potatoes, don't peel any of that stuff, because that's where, I mean, I married into a family where they peel apples, like,
Mhm.
and I was always like, don't peel on the, that. I would just eat the peel. Like when they would peel the apples, I would keep the peel and I would eat that because I didn't want to waste it. Now, of course, it's covered with a peel. It's, covered with pesticides, it's just, so that was my question is, so I used to tell my kids, the skin is where most of the nutrition is. So is that true? And specifically with potatoes?
Yeah, somebody you asked that. You think you know my accent, that's why you asked. Um, so in general, this stay away from skins. Period. Period. The skin is
So interesting.
period. We have to. I start lately. The past several conferences I went to, I started the kind. Now the presentation I was giving was more about fermented dairy and cheese, but it's applicable here. One of the things that I'm starting off with is, okay, there are only 3 resources in the world that are on the planet for the sole purpose of something else to consume it. I mean, and I don't think we think about this all the time because we think, I might as, but a lot of people, they try to make decisions about what they should put into their mouths based on questions like, am I designed to consume it? Or is it here, did some greater power put it on this planet for me to eat it or whatever? And the reality is both of those are wrought with difficulties. If you're trying to figure out if the answers to those are the ways you should be nourishing yourself. The reality is there's only 3 things put on this planet that the purpose they're put on this planet is to be consumed by something else. One is breast milk, or milk in general, right, for baby mammals. The second is honey for baby bees. And the third is ripe fruit. Those are the only 3 things designed for something else to be consumed. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't eat those other things, but we just have to recognize that. Now, I love ribeye. I know ribeye is like the big most people that are carnivore love to get their ribeyes. A ribeye is not meant for us to eat. It doesn't mean you shouldn't eat it. A ribeye is meant to help a cow move around, right? That's why it's there. Beef liver is there to help a cow detoxify things in its environment. So if we think about that, especially in the form of from plants, very basic biology, plants, and I know so many people in the carnivore space, and I even mentioned Anthony earlier, say plants can hurt you, plants can kill you, they can, and they're not doing it intentionally. They're only trying to survive and reproduce viable offspring. That's their sole purpose. And plants are not genuinely just trying to be evil because it takes energy to create these toxins. Those toxins are very deliberate. They're here because of millions of years of evolutionary pressures, and they're serving a very important purpose. And if you think of it from that perspective, I can, in 15 seconds, well, maybe 30 seconds, change the way people think about plants, for example. So number one, if you think about the parts of the plants they're trying to protect, the important part of the plants, what we call USOs, underground storage organs. So roots, corms, tubers, that sort of thing, where the plants spend a lot of time in the summer, spring and summer, storing up starch and to live off of carbohydrates to live off of during the winter. That's incredibly important to that plant. If something goes wrong with that plant will die. So things like potatoes are inherently incredibly dangerous because they are loaded with toxins to protect them. Now, if that's true, and I'm confident it is, I've done a lot of research of this, including ethnographic research in Bolivia and Peru, specifically on potatoes, the most poisonous part of that root, of that corm, that tuber, is actually the skin. The purpose of the toxin is there to protect it. And the barrier between the important part of the plant and the outside world is actually that skin. So that if nothing else, if you're gonna eat potatoes or some sort of an underground storage organ where they put a lot of energy and effort into storing up carbohydrates, then at least peel it. You're like 80% of the way towards a much safer food simply by peeling it. I spent a lot of time in the areas of Peru and Bolivia where potatoes were first domesticated. And every single potato that I saw, except for in one instance, every single potato, and I mean, I'm talking thousands of potatoes prepared in thousands of different ways, from in the 16,000 feet in the Altiplano of Bolivia, in the Andes in Peru, and even in Lima at what 2 years after I was at the restaurant became literally the #1 restaurant in the world, Restaurant Central. So literally one of the best restaurants in the world. In all these different contexts, every single potato was peeled, except for one instance. And I asked everybody, why? Why are you peeling the potato? And the answer is always the same. That's where all the poison is. So, period. So if you do nothing else, do that. As far as potatoes are concerned, the last little piece of that before we move on, if it starts to turn green, then throw it away. It is not fit for human consumption. That green tinge that you see on the potato is actually a product of it being stored improperly, usually with too much access to sunlight. And a potato is not a dead food. A potato is actually dormant. You can cut up a potato and put it in the ground, right? And it's sprouts. So it's still trying to protect itself. And if it is in an environment where it thinks it needs to be protected, and in this case, it has access to too much sunlight, it will produce way too many toxins. And it's evident through that little bit of green. That green is not the spot where the toxin is. The toxin has permeated the entire potato. That is just evidence of it. So don't scrape off the green and eat the potato. You throw the entire thing out. So very quickly, the stems, the leaves, those kind of things change quite rapidly. In some cases, they're very toxic. Some cases are not very toxic. In some cases, they're toxic during certain times of the year. But typically, if it's an edible plant, it's not a very big deal. The big deal comes when we look at the flowers and the fruits. Flowers are designed to attract. Most parts of the plant is designed to repel, but a flower is designed to attract, especially one that requires pollination from insects, right, to reproduce. So flowers are typically beautiful. They're showy, they smell good, they taste good, and are typically very low in toxins or have no toxins in them because of that reason. So flowers are typically very safe. Fruits, on the other hand, are a whole nother thing. The sole purpose of a ripe fruit is to attract an animal to consume it when the seeds are mature, and the seeds will then go through the digestive tract and get deposited in a pile of manure somewhere else, and the plant propagates. It's an evolutionary process that works great. So it typically looks good, smells good, tastes good, and is very low or has no toxins in it when it's ripe, in most cases. However, for as much as the sole purpose of a ripe fruit is to attract, the sole purpose of an unripe fruit is to repel, because it makes no evolutionary sense for an animal to consume a fruit if the seeds aren't ripe, because every one of those seeds is going to die. There's no chance of it growing into a plant somewhere. So even in plants where the fruit is very, very safe when it's mature, the unripe version of it is usually loaded with toxins. And I know we're like, oh, hey, well, you're thinking about wild plants. And in some cases, wild plants for sure. Like around us, we have, you have them in Virginia as well, pawpaws. Pawpaws are a great example. Unripe pawpaws are loaded with a very problematic neurotoxin that gets shut off most of it gets shut off when the pawpaw becomes mature. We have wild persimmons around here. Wild persimmon, same thing. A wild persimmon that's ripe is one of my favorite fruits in the world. A wild persimmon that's unripe is incredibly astringent and sucks all the water out of your mouth. Tomatoes. Green tomatoes are loaded with a toxin called tomatine. And if you eat one, fried green tomato sandwich, it's not a very big deal. But if you continuously eat it, it actually can build up and cause problems. But when the tomato turns ripe, that particular toxin gets shut off. So unripe fruits, always stay away from. The skins of roots and even fruits are there to protect, and I typically remove them whenever possible. And also stay away from seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes unless they're highly processed in order to make them, to detoxify them. Those are the babies of the plant. They're the progeny. They're the next generation. They put a massive amount of effort into protecting them through chemicals. And if you're going to have a grain, nut, a seed, or legume, then you need to be sure of exactly what it is. And some of them don't even touch, and other ones you need to process the right way. But I would never eat an unprocessed grain, seed, nut, or legume.
The skin thing is just blowing me away, because the amount of times I have fussed at people for peeling their carrots and peeling their potatoes. And there was a time where I didn't eat the potatoes, and my kids didn't, I wasn't eating them because of the carbs or whatever. And my kids would discard the skins, and I would eat all of the skins. I would eat 6 or 7 potatoes worth of skin with a little bit of butter and salt on them rather than eating the whole potato.
I just saw a thing. My dad just sent this to me literally yesterday. It was on YouTube, or I forget. It was on somewhere. And this woman, she's blaming her husband for poisoning her. I mean, she's kind of half joking about it, but she got poisoning from the potato skins and ended up, I think she ended up in the hospital. I'm not sure, but she was really, really sick from eating. Now it had started to turn green, but
Yeah.
but she ate the skins. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I was told the exact same thing. And here's the problem. We don't have an opportunity in most conversations to dive as deep as this into talking about food and diet and health and nutrition and safety and all of these things. So we lump things together. So, okay, wait, we have categories. Bread. Well, most people listening to this would go, well, bread, no, we can't have bread. There are different forms of bread. Same thing with dairy and fermented dairy. Same thing with plants. Same thing with parts of plants and different seasons of plants. And here's a fantastic example. So a tomato, I have a lot of my family is Italian. On my father's side, my grandmother loved, she's since passed, but my grandmother loved tomatoes. My dad loves tomatoes. I love tomatoes. Every one of us, our feet are destroyed if we eat tomatoes. Now, my grandmother, unfortunately, I didn't know this till after she passed, spent the last maybe 10 or 15 years of her life in horrible pain in her feet. And it's usually after she'd eaten tomatoes, but she just loves tomatoes so much. It was actually, for her, worth it to eat tomatoes.
Yeah.
And similar things happened to my father and I. But when we applied this understanding, now some people again would say, well, then don't eat the tomato. And there's a lot of reasons not to eat the tomato, but you do like the tomato. So what we found is if you eat the flesh of the tomato, if we eat the flesh of the tomato, we have no visible symptoms of this whatsoever. If we peel it and take the seeds out and eat the flesh of it, so we have tomato soup, we can have tomato sauce, we can have fresh tomato if we don't eat the seeds or the skin, no issues whatsoever. But if we have the skin and the seeds, we feel it the next day every single time. So again, I'm not suggesting anybody eats a tomato, but understanding some of these nuances can make the difference between incorporating a food into your diet in a healthier and safer way, or just or suffering from something, or just not having it at all.
That is really interesting because on the rare occasion that I eat a tomato, my eye, well, it starts out with one eye, will get itchy. And it starts out really simple. Like I'll be like, oh, I have an itch. And then we're watching TV in the evening or whatever. And then I'm like, oh, I have an itch. Sometimes by the time I go to bed, my eye is swollen shut because it itches, and it starts off, like I said, really simply, like, oh, I have an itch, and I don't realize that's what's happening. And then before I know it, I am like, it is so itchy. I want to scratch my eyes out. And sometimes in the morning when I wake up, it's still swollen because I messed with it so much before bed. Like, I mean, obviously it starts out slow, but then within a few minutes, I realize I am going to town on my itchy eye. And honestly, I will wake up the next day sometimes and it's red and swollen. That doesn't happen if I don't give in to the urge to scratch it. It just goes away, I guess, by morning. But also it'll be crusty too. Oxalates, with either the tomato or whatever else I'm eating with it. My teenage daughters have a favorite taco meat recipe where you blend up the tomatoes, the onion, and the jalapenos. And I do eat this sometimes because you pour it in with the meat and it cooks down and just turns into the spices on the meat. And that happens to me every time. So, and it does call for getting rid of the seeds, but sometimes we leave them in because it's just easier. So I'm curious, like, I wonder if I blanched those tomatoes and took the skin off and then did get rid of the insides, like the recipe calls for, if it would still bother my eyes like that.
There is, if anybody, and again, please, I want everybody to understand, because people that are at this time space in their journey where they may be full carnivore and seeing the incredible benefits of it, and there are, believe me, and I think one of the most incredible benefits of being on a carnivore diet is you immediately get rid of all the plant toxins in your diet. Immediately. There's no oxalates, there's no phytates, there's no lectins, there's none of those things. There's none of those things in your diet at all. And I think that's fantastic. I do feel for many people, I think probably for all people at some level, the diet that healed you is not the diet for you for the rest of your life.
Sure.
For lots of reasons. And one is because whatever, thank God you found the diet that healed you of whatever, the low-hanging fruit, the most important thing you needed to solve in your own journey was for your health. When that's taken care of, then the next thing then something else arises. Okay, now this, I need to take care of this, and it's probably going to require a dietary shift at some level. Even if not, even if you're like, I've solved it all, there are things in our diets because they're pulling on those strings a little bit. You remember it as a child with your grandmother, or it's part of a holiday tradition or whatever. There's something that may not be on that dietary plan that you're sticking to, that you're going to incorporate either every now and then or on a regular basis. And it's at those places where it's very important to understand there are different levels and different ways of doing it. Like if you incorporate bread, or you incorporate dairy, you incorporate vegetables, some of these little nuances can make all the difference. A great example is if you're 60 to 70% of adult humans are lactose intolerant. It's more common to be lactose intolerant than it is to be lactose tolerant. A truly fully fermented dairy product, genuine yogurt, especially if it's been fermented for 24 hours, a real cheese, kefir, these are lactose-free foods because the lactose is the food for the bacteria responsible for the fermentation. So we lump things together in this category. I can't have dairy because I'm lactose. No, that's not true at all. If you have dairy the way our ancestors for at least 7,000 years were consuming dairy, then you're going to be absolutely fine if it's a lactose issue, because there's no lactose in it whatsoever, as long as it's true and it's genuine and it's traditional. But I say all this, if you're going to include tomatoes in your diet, there is a machine on Amazon. I forget how much it is. It is a food mill that clamps to the side of your counter and your countertop, and you just spin it like this, and it seeds and takes the skins off, and you don't even have to blanch it. They're amazing.
It seeds it too?
It seeds it and takes the skin off.
That's incredible.
Fantastic. I forget that. I think Victoria makes it, or Victorinox or something. It is a fantastic. And you can use it on all sorts of things. I know we're on a carnivore podcast, but you could take apples and, roast apples and run them through for applesauce, and it takes the seeds and the skins off, and beautiful applesauce comes out. So there's a lot of things you can do with it.
Okay. I'll look for that. That's very interesting. I don't eat tomatoes a lot, but it would be really nice because the girls want to make it the way the recipe calls for. I'm just lazy, and I'm like, I just throw the whole tomato in. It's going to cook down anyway. But we would totally use that and get those seeds out. And then I'd be really curious to see if my eyes still bothered me afterwards. That's a very curious thing. Okay, we've talked about bread a few times here. So let's talk about sourdough. It's trending. It's very, very trendy to have sourdough bread. I'm not celiac as far as I know, but I haven't had wheat on purpose in probably about 12 years because I get restless leg syndrome from it. Figured it out through process of elimination. It was so bad that when I was pregnant with my last two daughters, I had to take Ambien with our third child, because I couldn't sleep because it was so bad. I mean, I would be pacing in the living room crying in the middle of the night. It was so bad. With our fourth child, I actually ended up having to take Valium, which is a Schedule C drug. They're not sure whether or not it affects the fetus, but the doctor said I was going to lose the baby from the lack of sleep and the stress on my body from not sleeping. It was so bad. Not one time I went to a neurologist, I went to specialists, not one time did somebody say to me, I wonder if this is being caused by something you're eating. Now they are 19 and 17 now, so this was 20 and 18 years ago. Not one doctor that I went to said, I wonder if this could be something that you're eating. So when our third child was about 6, she had a rash, and we thought maybe it was because of wheat, because we had a friend that had a rash from wheat. So I took her off wheat and said, I'll do it with you. She was young, so I was like, I'll do it with you. And 3 weeks later, she was sleeping so much better. She was a terrible sleeper the whole time she was little. Now I know why. She has restless leg syndrome like I do. But I was dropping her off at a church event, and they said, we're having pizza and cupcakes. What do you want us to do? And I was like, if I'm not back in 20 minutes, just give it to her. It was 9-10 years ago. You couldn't, longer than that. You couldn't go into a store and get like a gluten-free pizza real quick, right. And you couldn't find gluten-free cupcakes that easily. So I just let her have it. And when I put her to bed that night, she said, Mom, I'm all itchy and my legs won't be still. And I immediately burst into tears, because the nights that I had spent putting her back in bed over and over and over again, when she was 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, she would get up in the middle of the night, night after night after night. And we lived in a camper at one point, a fifth wheel that we were traveling around the country in. And I would pick her up and I would put her back in bed, and I would pick her up. And the idea that I was so upset with her all those nights for not sleeping, and that I was making homemade whole wheat bread, 3 loaves a day, with homemade whole wheat pizza and dessert pizza, and everything we ate was whole wheat pasta. Everything was whole wheat. I probably gave us the allergy. But in any case, I have experimented with some sourdough bread this year. My daughter found a sourdough dealer that lives near her and brought us later. And so I tried a couple of bites the first day and I was fine. It turns out I can eat, oh, I don't know, half a loaf of sourdough bread in a day and not have it affect me. So I try not to eat it anymore. It's been a while. That was a really hard, like 6 months for me when I realized I could eat sourdough because I was eating some sourdough. So let's talk about that for a minute. It's very trendy to eat sourdough, but a lot of people who can't eat wheat, even celiacs, can eat really good, genuine sourdough bread. So is it the original bread? And how do we know what to look for to know whether or not what we're buying is actually sourdough?
Thank you so much. This is so incredibly important. Okay, everybody, please understand. I am not trying to push sourdough, any bread in any form on anybody. But if you're going to have bread, the bread I'm going to describe in a minute is your absolutely best choice. And if somebody else in your family is eating bread, then this is the absolute best choice as well. And I'll tell you a very quick story before I dive into it. When we made the decision to transform our family's health, the first thing I did was I cooked everything from scratch. Like literally, I mean, everything for an entire year. And almost all the meat we consumed, me and my son killed. If not, it came from a local farmer, but we did all the butchering. We made all the cheese. We made all the butter. We made in between wild plants and stuff. I mean, literally the entire year. I will tell you that it was the most stressful year of our entire family's life because eating was such a chore. Cooking, preparing was such a chore. We backed off. Now that is exactly how our restaurant is founded, but we now have 35 people working that's making all that food, not one person. So, but when after that year was over, and my wife and I really sat down and had a conversation about what had transpired during that year and how stressful it all was, we said, okay, well, we're going to back up and start slowly. Where are we going to start? And we actually made, and this is coming from somebody who's very animal based in my approach to food. What I did change, the first thing I changed was our bread. And I realized I have 3 kids. They were all school age. They were all taking a sandwich to lunch every day. And I said, if I can at least make the bread that they're going to take a sandwich for every day, that's at least 2 slices of bread every day of their life for years and years and years, then I'm going to make a difference in their health. We then change. But so even though some of us might not be eating bread, there's people around us that are, and we can literally transform their health by changing the bread. So very quickly, the oldest loaf of bread in the world, or oldest example of bread in the world, dates to almost 8,000 years ago from a site called Carbohydrates in Turkey. And every single loaf of bread baked from 8,000 years ago into the mid-1800s was sourdough. By default, it was sourdough. And the reason is because there's wild yeast and wild bacteria in the air, on our skin, on the grains, everywhere. And when given the opportunity to ferment, in almost all cases, they ferment together, right? So genuine sourdough means that you have a combination of yeast and bacteria fermentation happening side by side. The yeast is eating the available sugars and making carbon dioxide, which makes the bread rise, and it's also making alcohol, which we don't really care about in bread. So for a bread baker, the only thing the yeast is doing, whether it's commercial Fleischmann's yeast in the grocery store or wild yeast from the air, it's just making carbon dioxide, making the bread rise. All the incredible stuff that happens in bread baking when it's done right is as a result of the bacteria. So the bacteria, all the lactobacillus bacteria, are eating the available sugars, and they're doing multiple things. They are helping detoxify the grains. They're helping to break down the grains. They're helping to make the nutrients in the grains more bioavailable to our bodies. They're creating the aromas. They're creating the flavors, all the wonderful things, and they're producing lactic acid. And what's incredibly important for us, humans who have no business eating unprocessed grains, is that when the lactic, and this is the part sourdough people aren't talking about enough, when the bacteria produce enough lactic acid, that means the pH is dropping. It's becoming more acidic, right? Sour. When it drops below 4.6 on a pH scale, it activates a protease enzyme. That means it's an enzyme that works on proteins, and gluten is a protein, and it starts chopping up and destroying that protein. So it's actually taking a So if you're allergic to something, you're allergic to a protein in almost all cases. If you're allergic to gluten as a protein, this protease enzyme is chopping up the gluten and turning it into individual amino acids. So, and those individual amino acids are things that even if you're celiac, in most cases, you can tolerate. So genuine, true, wild long, slow fermented sourdough bread is a completely different food than any other bread in the world. And it's solely a result because of that bacterial fermentation. Again, it helped detoxify. It helped make it more bioavailable, the nutrients in it. And it also helped turn the gluten into something that our bodies can tolerate better. Completely different food. The other thing that it does is because you have both the bacteria and yeast eating the available sugars, it's dropping the glycemic index of the food. So there's less carbohydrates and there's less available carbohydrates to our bodies. And there was a lot of studies have been done where they've taken a regular yeasted bread, every single yeasted bread in the world. I don't care if with real grains, not fake stuff like keto bread, but like every genuine grain-based bread that's just yeasted is in the high glycemic index range. And the studies that have been done is, okay, take that same recipe. I don't care if it's Wonder Bread. Take the same recipe and put it through the sourdough process, and it drops from the high glycemic range through the middle range down into the low range solely because of that fermentation. So from a carbohydrate perspective, this is a win. The second thing that, we just did a blog post about it a few weeks ago. If you take and because I was finally waiting, I knew this was the case, but I didn't know the numbers on this. If you take a loaf of sourdough bread and freeze it for 3 days, you can drop the available or the carbohydrates in it, I think, by another 40% or something. It's insane. So a genuine loaf of sourdough bread that has been frozen, right, turn it into resistant starch for 3 days. You see the maximum benefits at 3 days, and then really nothing else after 3 days after that. So in 3 days or anything beyond it, and it is literally a completely different food, including on a glycemic index. The problem is there's no FDA regulation in the entire country for calling something sourdough. And everything I've seen commercially available, I don't mean from a small bakery. I mean from a grocery store, from a big box store, even from a restaurant. Almost anything called sourdough is not sourdough bread for a lot of different reasons. And you have to be very careful. And this is what to look for. Number one, the best thing you can do is make it yourself. And it's not that hard. Make it yourself, and then you know everything that's gone into it and the entire process. The next best thing to do is go to a small bakery that you can talk to somebody there, directly talk to the baker and ask them about their bread, and then they can, you know that you're getting the real thing. If you're going to buy the bread off the shelf, then this is what you look for. Number one, look to see if it says yeast. Now, there are some sourdough bakers that add a little bit of yeast in just because they don't have full control over the ferment. You don't need to add yeast, and we don't here at all. But if they're putting it through the sourdough process and they're adding yeast, you still can get the benefits of the sourdough process. However, if it says yeast on the label, it probably isn't sourdough. They're using the yeast to leaven it. There's no wild bacteria. There's no wild yeast. It's just that yeast. So if it says yeast, I'd be really, really cautious. If it says anything sour, if any of the ingredients have a sour flavor to them, it's almost 100% not sourdough. So if it says lactic acid, citric acid, acetic acid, or vinegar, which is the same thing, then what they're doing is they're playing on the public sort of misperception that sourdough bread has to taste sour. They're making a yeasted bread, adding something sour to it to change the flavor, and then putting it in a brown bag and boosting the price and calling it sourdough, and it's not sourdough. And if you are celiac or gluten intolerant, then you are no better off eating that bread than anything else in the grocery store. We have 11 confirmed medically diagnosed celiac customers here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen that are absolutely fine on our bread. One is an 86-year-old woman that eats a slice of our bread literally every day and has done so for years. We have, I don't know the number, we have scores of people that are gluten intolerant that are absolutely fine on our bread. But I will say we do have some customers that are celiac that are not fine on our bread. Like anything else, it is a spectrum. There's different levels of sensitivity. But the other thing that's really important, and I have mixed feelings about the organic label for a lot of different reasons. There's some things in our restaurant that are not organic, and partially it's a very conscious decision to support some of our local farmers that for one reason or another haven't got the certification to be organic, but are doing incredible things with their farms. We'd rather support them than slap an organic label on our.
It's very expensive.
Oh, heck yes.
It's very expensive. That's why they haven't done it yet.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So we'd rather support them. But what we have done is all of our flour is organic. And this is really, really important because if you're having issues with a grain-based food, bread or a cupcake or whatever it is, it may be gluten. It very well could be the additives that they put into flour, and it's not that they, flour companies want to put it in there. They are required to put it in there unless it has organic, and like for example, folic acid. So which causes all sorts of issues, especially if you have the MTHFR gene variant, right? So we are 100% organic in our flour because we know that there's nothing added to that flour whatsoever, and then put it through that sourdough process. So if you are baking sourdough at home, I suggest you get a pH meter. Every single bit of a bread, anything that we create here, we use a pH meter for, and that is a judge of how much bacterial activity has happened during the fermentation. And we require all flour or all grains at all that are going into a bake to get to below 4.6 on a pH scale before it gets baked, or else we don't consider it sourdough. And if you're talking to someone who's making sourdough and you're asking them about their sourdough, then same thing. Has it gone through the full fermentation process? Are you using wild bacteria? And again, it's a completely different food. One little caveat, I'm just going to throw it out there for those of you who know. So for some of you, it might be like, I don't even want to hear any more about sourdough. But for those of you who do understand some things about sourdough, I just want to dispel another myth very quickly. The bacteria do not work in a refrigerator. When you put dough in a refrigerator, it has wild bacteria and yeast in it. The 39 degree, 42 degree, whatever your refrigerator is, temperature slows the yeast down. So there's some people do something called, when they're baking, they call it retarding the bread. They take the bread, they put the dough, they put it in the fridge, and the next day they bake it off. And that's fine. It slowed the yeast down so that you don't have to get it in 3 hours in the oven. You could go like 16 hours. But the bacteria shut down at that temperature. They don't do any work whatsoever. So if you do not have that dough at room temperature long enough for that full fermentation to take place, then you might have something that looks like a loaf of sourdough. You might have even put beautiful sourdough mother into it, but it isn't, at least according to my definition, I wouldn't consider it sourdough because you haven't reached that pH that activates that enzyme that then does all that important work. So pH meter.
And again, we're not recommending anybody eat sourdough bread, but many people out there are eating regular bread. And so if you're going to eat some bread, have the sourdough instead, although we're not endorsing it.
Absolutely.
Right.
No, I completely agree. I listen, we have a full sourdough bakery downstairs. Like we are pumping out hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread. I eat probably 2 slices worth of bread every 3 months. Like, I mean, that's how much I eat. But if I'm going to eat bread, like, it's so interesting. I think probably most people who have adopted a carnivore diet or even a keto diet, any of these different dietary lifestyles have recognized that, or have like partitioned choices of food into, okay, this I consider food. And this, even though 80% of the population consider it food, I don't consider it fit for human consumption, right? And when you make that switch, like getting rid of all the junk, the seed oils and the other things in your pantry isn't like this wasteful thing. It's this like life-saving thing that you're doing. We've made that switch in our head about bread, and we don't even see the bread aisle in the grocery store,
right.
the fake sourdough buns at the restaurant as even a food option. It's not even anybody in our family, and I think that's been very helpful.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's touch on raw milk, because this is another hot button topic, and I would like for people to understand what made pasteurization become a requirement, and what is it about raw milk that makes people so scared of it. I drink some raw milk. I get it from Miller's Bio Farm. Love that farm so much. Their stuff is so good, right? The heavy cream, when you open up a jar of their heavy cream, there's this thick layer on top that's like, gosh, I don't know, it's all like custard. Like, I wish the whole jar was like that. I just drink it out of the jar. It's my favorite way to consume their raw cream. I just drink it out of the jar. I hate to waste it and put it in coffee. I would rather use like regular store-bought heavy cream in my coffee than use theirs, because I want theirs like just like it comes almost. And I know that's wrong, but anyway,
no, that's not wrong at all.
I just love it the way it comes. So let's talk about the raw milk thing, and what is it about raw milk that makes it so that it's illegal to sell it in most states?
Sure. I mentioned a few minutes ago that there's only three things in the world that are put on the planet for something else to consume, and one of them was milk.
Mm-hmm.
Out of all of those things, out of actually all the foods in the world, all the different choices we could have, there's only one thing that we are perfectly designed to consume without any sort of outside impact or technology, and that's actually milk from our mothers, right? I mean, it's perfectly designed for us. We're perfectly designed for it, but only the caveat is only for a certain period of our lives, right? When we're infants. When we and every other mammal in the world gets weaned off of their mothers, they lose the ability to efficiently and safely derive nutrition from that milk. That includes every human on the planet. Now, there were two independent genetic mutations that took place probably about 7,000 years ago or so, that resulted in what we call lactase persistence. So some humans will then, in adulthood, still produce the enzyme lactase to digest the lactose in milk. So if you, and those genetic mutations took place, one took place in Europe, one took place in East Africa. So if you are lactose tolerant as an adult, you can still consume milk as an adult without ill effects because of the lactose. Somewhere in your past, you have heritage from ancestry from one of those or both of those two places. So that said, even cats. Cats, I don't care if you love your cat and you want to give your cat milk, cats are lactose intolerant. All mammals are lactose intolerant, except for some humans who have this genetic mutation. Now, there's a lot of people that are anti-animal meat kind of thing that would suggest we shouldn't consume dairy for anything because of animal rights reasons. There's a lot of people in the dietary world that suggest we shouldn't consume dairy as adults because we're not designed to consume dairy as adults. Well, my answer to that is we are not designed as humans to eat, and I know this is hard for us to grasp, we are not designed to eat almost everything that we eat. We require some sort of technological innovation to take a raw material, make it safe, and make it nourishing, and then we eat it. That's what we do as humans, and I don't care what it is. And even if you're thinking about that ribeye, even if you're going to eat it raw, you used a knife. We used something to kill that cow. We used a knife to butcher that cow. We then cut that ribeye up, and you didn't do all these things with your hands. We had these technological innovations. With plants, we have to detox. We have to do all these things. So I don't like to stop at this, oh, our body's not designed to consume it, so we shouldn't consume it. It's, hey, what can we do to that food or that resource to make it as safe and nourishing as it can be? And with dairy, the only thing we have to do is look at ourselves when we were infants. When we were infants and we were drinking from our mothers, part of the what happened inside of our bodies is we had all these enzymes that did all these wonderful things, including the lactase, but we also fermented that milk inside of our bodies. And that's why when you burp a baby on your shoulder and it spits up and it looks like cottage cheese and it smells like provolone cheese, it's because it is. We make cheese in our stomachs. That's actually when we make cheese, we're replicating the same thing that happened inside of our bodies, inside of a cow, whatever. So I am going to talk about raw milk, but I want everybody to recognize I think raw milk is incredible. Good raw milk is incredible. I think fermented raw milk is even better, right? That is a safer and more nourishing way to consume dairy as an adult human than it is just to drink that raw milk. And if you look around the world at traditional groups around the world, there's only two groups in the world that drink milk, right? The Maasai and the Samburu warriors who drink blood and milk literally every day. But other than that, nobody drinks milk. We have an entire industry in this country, in this world, based on liquid milk, and liquid milk has never been a thing traditionally for us. We always fermented it into yogurt or cheese or kefir or other things, and now we have this industry built on liquid milk getting transported all over the world. And to do that, it is very difficult to do that with raw dairy. It is very difficult to keep milk from fermenting and keep it good at the same time, right? It's a very weird thing. So we've had access, archaeologically, we know we've had access to milk from other animals for at least 46,000 years ago. We found some cave paintings on a wall had used mineral pigments that were suspended in some sort of bovine milk to paint with. So we knew they were getting milk from something. I don't know if they were drinking it then, but we at least had access to it 40-something thousand years ago. we are pretty confident that milk from other animals has been in our diets for at least 8 or 9,000 years. That's the time when we started domesticating milk-producing animals. And there's some evidence for cheese making at 7,000 something years old. So we've been dealing with fermented dairy for quite some time. All of that time, this milk has been raw. It wasn't until the end of the 1800s when there's multiple reasons why we started pasteurizing our milk, but one of the biggest reasons, I'll give the quick version of this, is that at the end of the 1800s, our entire food system in this country transformed. And part of it was because at the end of the Civil War, we had during the Civil War, we created all these railroads all over the country for war efforts. But then now we have this infrastructure and we can start moving food around in ways we never could move food around before. And one of the things we started doing is instead of, small little groups of everybody raising animals and little butchers in every single town, we started taking animals and transporting the animals themselves. And then when we realized that wasn't working so good, we started then taking parts of animals and trying to ship them. And then we had these huge meat processing centers like St. Louis, for example, popping up as, huge areas and meat was getting shipped. But as we started concentrating where animals were, we started trying to become very efficient with this. And we thought we were very smart. So one of the things we did was we said, you know what? Alcohol is a big thing. Whiskey, for example, rye whiskey and corn whiskey were big things. So these distilleries were around on the outskirts of these cities. And then we said, wow, what we can do is we can take the distilleries and what's left from the distillery, all the spent grains from making the whiskey, and then we could have a dairy right next to the distillery, and we can feed the cows the spent grains from the distillery, and then we can milk the cows, and we could take the milk, and we could take the whiskey, and we could ship it into the cities, and it would sound like a great thing. Well, there were several major problems. One is that the cows aren't designed, obviously, to eat grains. They're designed to eat grass. But what was even worse is I know we don't think about alcohol as a form of nutrition, but it actually is in a different context. And I'm not suggesting anybody starts drinking who's not, but if I gave you a kernel of corn and said, eat it, a hard kernel of corn, even if you ate it, you would see it in the toilet the next day. Like, our body is not designed to derive nutrition from that corn. I could take that corn and nixtamalize it and grind it and turn it into masa and turn it into a tortilla and get some nutrition from that corn. Or I could take that corn and turn it into whiskey. And if I turn that corn into whiskey, then I'm actually getting nutrition from that corn. Again, I'm not suggesting we should drink it, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because the process of turning that corn into whiskey means we're taking nutrients out of that corn and it's in the whiskey. So not only were we feeding these grains to cows that they shouldn't be eating, we were feeding grains that had almost no nutrition in them whatsoever to these cows, and they were getting very, very, very sick. The accounts of these cows and these dairies were that they were standing knee deep in their own filth. There's dead cows over here. They're milking these cows over here. And the milk that was coming out of these cows were every color of it white. And they did everything they could to try to make this milk white. They were adding chalk and talc and animal brains, which turned things really, really, really white. And they were doing all this stuff to adulterate this milk to make it look like it was supposed to look from a healthy cow. You had this really nasty, disease-ridden milk getting shipped into cities at a time when we didn't have a handle on refrigeration. And also, one of the other things that was happening at the time is because of when people moved from the country into the city, especially at this time, they almost automatically became two-income households. They had to be to survive inside of a city. So you had the father and the mother both working, and we didn't have an opportunity to pump breast milk and do all these things. So very, very young, vulnerable infants were getting weaned off of their mothers very early so the mother could go back to work. And they started to give them cow's milk. And this cow's milk, again, was disease-ridden, terrible milk. And babies were getting sick and dying left and right. So we had a choice to make as a country. We could either transform the entire dairy industry, which was fine for 7,000 years, and clean it all up and change everything, or we could boil the milk. And obviously we decided to start boiling or pasteurizing the milk. And you can make the argument that pasteurized, terrible milk that would make you sick, if you pasteurized it, it wouldn't make you sick, at least in the short term, that was a good thing. And I can see that argument. The problem is, what we don't understand is pasteurizing doesn't make pasteurizing doesn't make bad milk good. It just makes bad milk not lethal. It's still bad milk. It just isn't full of all these live pathogenic microorganisms. It's going to like make you sick immediately. So we started doing this, and it was much easier to have a dairy system set up where we didn't have to have these, strict controls over the quality of the milk and the quality of the cow and the quality of all these things. We could just pasteurize the milk, and that dairy industry just grew and grew and grew over decades. And everybody was scared of milk, and many of us are still scared of milk. Meanwhile, for 7,000, first of all, every one of us who was breastfed entered this world and were a nourished baby on the back of raw milk. And 7,000 years at least, we've been consuming raw dairy from other animals almost all over the world. And now we're at a place where we're incredibly scared of it. I'm a huge advocate of raw milk. I'm a larger advocate of fermented raw milk. But I will say it isn't like this, we have these black and white conversations. There is such a thing as bad raw milk. I mean, there is a reason we started pasteurizing, because that raw milk was bad. And there are still many dairies producing milk that I would never drink raw. So if you're going to drink raw milk, like any other food in your diet, you should go look at the source. You go to the farm, look at the farm, talk to the farmer, see the cows. They should know the cows' names. It shouldn't be a huge mega dairy. It should look clean. They should be drinking their own milk. All of those things. It should smell right. It should look right. All of those things that you use to decide whether or not another food's going to enter your diet, you should use there as well. And our family, their entire lives were brought up on raw milk in states that raw milk was illegal. And I was traveling Pennsylvania every week or every 2 weeks to get multiple gallons of milk for everything.
Yeah, I don't know anybody. I know a lot of people that drink raw milk, and I don't know anybody that's had a bad experience with raw milk. So, the statistics aren't really fair when you talk about, the amount of people that get sick every year from drinking raw milk, because, it's a small community of people that drink raw milk, compared to regular milk. So you can't really do that comparison, but we can say we both know a lot of people that drink raw milk and nobody has ever gotten sick from it.
I thought I got sick once. And so it was at a time the kids were really, really young. I think it was so our oldest daughter had been born, our son. So our oldest daughter was probably 3, our son was 1, and we hadn't had our third daughter yet. I was home with the kids, and I had just gone, we went to Pennsylvania, I picked up raw milk, came back, and I was making kefir with it, doing all these things. And this one particular day, I was making a shake with the kefir, and I think I put in like goji berries and honey. I don't remember what it was. And I drank this, and I got violently ill, like so incredibly violently ill. And I called the dairy right away, and I said, "Listen, I just want to let you know I had some of your milk, and I'm really, really sick, and I just wanted to let you know." And obviously they got super scared. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it! And nobody else let us know this, but thank you for letting us know immediately," and all this. So it kind of scared. It was at a time that I was testing the waters with raw milk, because every Google search that I had done said that I should get arrested for being a bad father, and I'm going to kill my family. So anyhow, about 2 or 3 weeks passed, when I got the nerve up to go again and get the milk, and I got the milk, and I'm making my kefir, I'm doing my thing for weeks and weeks and weeks. And about a month or 2 later, I said, I want to make that shake. And I made that same shake with the same package of dried goji berries from Whole Foods, and I was violently ill. It was the goji berries. It was the goji berries with the organic label that cost me probably $25 from Whole Foods that nobody would have ever questioned. The goji berries made me sick, but because of the way that that we believe raw milk to be so dangerous, that's exactly where my mind went. And if I had stopped drinking raw milk then and succumbed to all that nonsense and had this conversation right now, I'd have said, don't ever have raw milk because it made me sick. And you know what? It didn't. It didn't make me sick at all. Our family's living, nourished because of the raw milk.
That's crazy. Okay. So there is a group of people, I don't know if you've heard about this or not, that were carnivore or were keto or were low carb for years, that have now started adding 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates from fruit into their diets. And they're advocating for this for other people, saying you should be eating whole food carbohydrates, 300 to 400 grams in a day. And these people are showing off their, I want to say fit bodies, and saying, I got this because I started adding carbs back in last month or 2 or 3 months ago. Meanwhile, some of these people have been low carb for 20 years or more. That's why they're in probably such good shape. And so what do you think about that? What do you think about somebody adding in that many carbohydrates in a day when our bodies aren't really meant to have that many carbohydrates.
I want to make sure I'm answering where I have expertise in. So I am not a nutritionist, and I don't want to speak from, I have a PhD, but it's in archaeology. So I don't want to think Dr. Bill Schindler is not a medical doctor. So I don't want to speak to it from a nutrition sort of perspective, right? That part, but I do want to speak to it to, first of all, my own personal experience, but also that sort of ancestral approach and how I believe it to be. So I do much better on an incredibly low carb diet, and I have been on an incredibly low carb diet now for probably 6 years and feel better than I've ever felt in my entire life. I myself would never do that, and I don't think it would be good for me. If we're looking at it from an ancestral perspective, the fruit, I mean, we say something like fruit, and you're like, oh, it's a natural thing. And no, the fruit that's in the grocery store is nothing like wild fruit. Like, there's no comparison whatsoever on a lot of different levels. There's very few wild fruits that have the glycemic index of the fruit in the grocery store. And even then, you have to work really, really hard to get it. They're wild fruits. The ancestors, so every single fruit that's in the grocery store or at the farmer's market has a wild ancestor. Everything that is domesticated, plant or animal that we consume, has a wild ancestor. And the wild ancestor of these foods, if they were being consumed, are the foods that our ancestors were consuming. A wild fruit is typically a lot smaller. The flesh of it is a lot smaller. It is typically nowhere near as sweet. The pits and the seeds that are inside of it are usually a heck of a lot larger, and you have to work really hard to get a little bit out of it. It's not like a watermelon or a banana. I mean, look at a wild banana. My God, I ate a wild orange once. I had a wild orange. The size of the wild orange was about the tip of my pinky. And if you've ever had a kumquat, you ever had a kumquat?
Yes. Yes, I love kumquats.
I love them too. It was about a half or the third the size of a kumquat, and loaded with seeds, and was so bitter that I spit it out immediately. I mean, it was nothing like an orange today. So this idea, this vision that, oh, I'm going to be like my ancestors and I'm going to go to the produce aisle and I'm going to get all this fruit, it's not anywhere near like that. And to consume that many carbohydrates from an ancestral perspective would have meant a massive amount of work, I don't even know if you could have done it other than potentially honey. But when we see honey in diets in the past, I lived with the Hadza for a while in Tanzania, the oldest hunter-gatherer group in the world. And my gosh, they loved their honey. They had it like once every 6 weeks. Now, when they had it, they ate as much as they could possibly get, but it wasn't like they had honey every night before they went to bed. And they had a bunch of honey, and then they didn't have honey for 6 weeks. So again, I don't know enough about the nutritional part of it. I know that I myself don't think that I would do it or I would benefit from it at all. I think it would be a detriment to me, but I'm confident that it isn't rooted in any sort of ancestral approach whatsoever. Were our ancestors eating fruits? Absolutely.
Yeah.
In many cases, they were. Very seasonally, very selectively, and it took a lot of work to get a little bit of return from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Bill, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate not only meeting you, but also having the time to share some of what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a plethora of information, and I'm so glad we did this today.
Me as well. So guess where I'm going? I'm going into a tree with my son right now.
That's awesome. I hope you have a wonderful time. I'll get to see you at Meat Stock. I'll talk more about Meat Stock later, but Meat Stock is an incredible event in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We're both going to be at May 2nd and 3rd of next year. So that's going to be really exciting.
Well, I look forward to seeing you in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time on the Carnivore Revolution.